So if you have a question as Joe's presenting, go ahead and type it in the chat. And if right now you wouldn't mind just typing in the chat your name and where you're from, your connection, that would be great. If you teach, what grade you teach, where you're at, if you're a pre-service teacher, just some basic information. And if there's anybody have any questions to get started, I'm going to let Joe go ahead and introduce himself. And thank you very much, Joe, for presenting today. And we are excited to hear what you have to say. Thanks.
I'm super happy to be with you guys, Cindy. Thank you. My name is Joe Boyle. I am a 17th year teacher in social studies in Toledo Public Schools. My home building is Waite High School on the east side of Toledo. I spent 10 years at Rogers on the west side, came over to Waite. And I teach in the district's distance learning program, which was a distance learning program even before COVID. And I teach in a classroom that looks like this. This is a picture from my classroom. And typically I am kind of standing at the front of this classroom, looking at the kids in front of me. And then on those two screens up there, I've got students from the other 5 high schools. So the transition to COVID, which is what I'll be talking about today, and the transition to remote education, was maybe not as difficult because I was used to having a lot of students I didn't have in person every day. One thing I do want to kind of warn you about right away. I am not in my classroom. I am in my dirty garage. This is a picture from my garage. This is not actual live. The green screen you see behind me is a picture of my green screen that is typically behind me. And you can kind of see my dirty little working area with lights and a mic and stuff. Which again is something I'll be talking about, but this is what I tend to use in class to keep it a little bit normal when I'm not trying to bring up something either educationally or as a gag. So all of that said, the reason I brought that up at the very beginning, we're rocking about 22 degrees out here right now. I have an electric heater that I alternate between my face and my feet, and my face gets really cold and my lips don't work real well. So if I'm stumbling over words, I promise you I'm not intoxicated at 10:45 in the morning. It's because my lips are turning purple right now. So I want to look through real quickly to who we've got here, because I think this is a different discussion on a pre-service level and for those of us who have been in the job for a little while. So it looks like we have Matthew, who's business at Springfield, Timothy, intervention at Springfield, Kate in literacy ed at BG, Hannah, pre-service, AYA science, Cindy, career tech workforce, A. Kelly. Can I ask what your first name is so I can have an idea? Anna, thank you. Anna is 6th grade science in Perrysburg. Karen from supply chain management. McKenna, pre-service math and science. Zach, pre-service social studies. Zach, I feel like I know you from somewhere.
Yeah, I believe we were just in the same Zoom call earlier.
Okay, boy, you look really familiar from other places, and I can't place.
I get around.
All right. We have Ning from high school and proximity learning, Haya, pre-service in intervention specialist, Christine at Perrysburg, Sarah, inclusive ECE at BG. Cool. So, I mean, it looks like we've got a pretty good mix of everybody. So I really apologize if I'm saying so, like, please feel free to stop me at any point if I'm saying something that is wholly not making sense. I am going to close the chat so I can kind of see the screen a little bit better. So, everybody got my screen? All right, cool. So, when Tracy asked me to present, it was back in like September, October, when things were in some ways even hairier than they are right now, because we were all kind of at the outset of this. And the proposal I put together for this was called Pedagogical Prepping, Survivalism in the Age of COVID. And I want to kind of dive into that word survival for a second, because as I've gone through this school year, I've had a number of people say, wow, that's wild. That's really cool what you guys are doing. And I'm like, yeah, no, we're just surviving. And people tend to kind of brush that off. And I don't think the communities understand that a lot of what all of us are doing right now is finding a way to survive. And that's both kind of a metaphor for the profession right now. For some of us, it is a very literal thing about physical survival. And I think for all of us, it's about the survival of public education over the long term, are different things that kind of go through the head right now. So I know preppers are getting a bad name in the wake of everything that's been going on. But I want to introduce you to the prepper that is always in my mind, and I inherit quite a bit from him. That is my grandfather. And my grandfather was a prepper before prepping was cool. When he built a addition onto the house, it had really thick concrete walls with a thick concrete ceiling over the basement room. And people were like, hey, you building a bomb shelter? He's like, no, just an addition. Well, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with home construction, but you typically don't put reinforced concrete roofs on your basement. That's when you're getting ready for the nuke. And that's what Pops was doing. He had, when he passed away, we found hundreds of rolls of toilet paper, which sure would have come in handy back in March. We found unopened bags of clothing. We found Comet dish detergent that was stocked up, canning, an extra well pump so he could, if the city shut off the water, he'd be able to tap in and keep things going. He was paranoid and had the paperwork to prove it by the time he passed away. But a lot of what Grandpa taught me stuck with me, which is be prepared for anything and try to adapt to it. So my situation, and the reason survival is kind of a thing for me, I have stage 4 cancer and I have damage to my lungs from radiation, which means COVID is something I'm really, really particularly not interested in. So I'm not using survival as a metaphor here. When I talk about this distance learning or remote learning now, as being an avenue of survival, for me, it's pretty personal. And as Kip says, I think you could say things are pretty serious. So the premise of this discussion is that COVID brought a lot of changes to all of us. But in sending us into survival mode, it kind of provided an opportunity to critically reassess what we're doing, how we do it, and why we do it. And maybe for some of us who have been doing this for kind of a long time, it got us back to where we were at the beginning of our careers with kind of a reflective practice. So I want to throw this out to you guys. Please feel free to talk and not just be in the chat box like the students are all the time when we're teaching remotely. But I want you to think back to last summer, maybe around July 4th weekend, and think about what you thought the biggest problems were going to be when we went back to school. And honestly, I'm just as interested to hear from pre-service students because you have probably more of a student perspective than those of us that are teaching right now. What did you think the biggest problems were going to be this year? Which ones turned out to be spot on? Which ones were completely unfounded? And what are some of the things that have happened since July 4th that you wouldn't have predicted? I'm just kind of curious from the room what we were thinking in the summer.
So I am a second-year student, but I'm a first-year education major at BGSU. And like I'm taking a class right now that is like centered around just an introduction to teaching secondary science. And I was meant to have like field experience this year and like go into a classroom and watch an experienced teacher teach science and like pick up on some tips and stuff and just like get a feel for the environment. Back in July, I probably would have said like, oh, like that'll happen and I'll be able to do that. And now I'm sitting here in January and I have to watch everything online. So I think as a pre-service teacher, COVID's been a little rough, and I'm glad that I'm just a first year and this isn't my like student teaching period. And I'm hoping couple years from now, that'll be out the door and I will be able to student teach in person. But so even at like just an elementary level, like this is my first year, it's already a problem with learning how to be an educator. So
so your first year in education program, is that correct?
yes, yep, I'm a sophomore and I changed my major, and so now I'm in education.
So from a student perspective, like did you perceive that a lot of your work was going to be online this year, or did you think we're probably going to be okay by the time we get to September, October?
Yeah, I thought it was going to be all cleared out by December. I thought that, we would have a handle on it by then, or we would have taken more precaution, I guess, as a nation. I think BG is doing a wonderful job as a university, but obviously they're still taking a lot of precautions. So I thought that we would be more in person. And I am more in person a little bit more this semester than last semester, but even so, like I do have a lot of virtual stuff going on. And I can say that's across the board for everybody, but I really did think that I would be more in person than I am.
Yeah, I think that's pretty common for a lot of us. Other folks, what did you think the biggest problems were going to be when we came back?
I was honestly expecting our entire network to crash.
Yes. And I don't
Because
think
in the spring, we were working remotely from our homes, and then everybody was back in buildings. So I was just expecting the network to crash day one. Happened to my sister-in-laws who teach in Tennessee and Virginia. So I was just expecting it here.
And we definitely, I don't know about the rest of you, but in TPS, we definitely had that happen. In the in the first couple of weeks, we had the network failure and then the hack where we couldn't get into our grade books for a month. So, other folks, what did you think the biggest problems were going to be when we got back?
I teach junior high, and I really thought that there was going to be an issue with the hybrid of teaching in person while also teaching virtually, because I had never taught a virtual class. So I thought that was going to be a big challenge.
Are you in the kind of hybrid where you have kids on camera with, like, some are live at home and some are live in front of you, or are you on that A/B rotation?
We're on the rotation. So
okay.
I teach half of my students in person, the other half are just doing their work online, and I just respond when needed.
Okay, got it.
It's worked very well, actually.
Good.
So yeah, easier than I thought it would be.
I'm really glad to hear that, because that's what we're facing in about 6 weeks, and it petrifies me.
The kids have adapted really well, and they can do a lot on their own, which is nice.
Outstanding. So what are some of the things that we didn't predict? Things that ended up being different than we thought they were going to be?
Joe, there's also a couple comments in the chats. Matt says, I didn't think that in-person learning would be possible, but we have been doing hybrid learning on and off, so that view was unfounded. And Nancy said the predicting exhaustion was spot on.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm going to move on just a little bit. When I can tell you exactly where I was this summer when I started thinking about the coming year, and it was July 4th weekend. It's like the Sunday of July 4th weekend. I was sitting in my parents' cabin up on Nettle Lake, and I started realizing, like, as I watched all of our neighbors having a party with 100 maskless people sharing food, I thought, oh, this is going to be bad, because at that point we were planning on going back on the hybrid and then transitioning to 5-day education. And I started thinking, this is not realistic. I don't think this is going to go the way everybody thinks it's going to go. And I guess in my mind, I started getting ready for the idea that it was going to be hybrid and online all year, and that 5 days for us was probably not going to happen. So I started thinking about everything that sucked last year, and the stuff that sucked in the winter and spring of 2020. It was connection issues. Yeah, some of the stuff that we predicted would be a problem. Audio video issues were bad. Like you'd have mics cutting out, and you'd have lighting that appeared to be a cigarette lighter 30 feet away for a kid. You had the feeling of disconnection, huge feeling of disconnection that both kids and teachers had last winter. And then for the kids, it was that they missed their friends, that there was just an enormous problem in trying to recreate social bonds intentionally. So this July, as I said, cases started spiking. I stopped thinking we were going to go back in person. I'm thinking about how much the fourth quarter sucked last year. And I spent a few days pretty much rolled into a ball in panic, thinking about how is this even going to work? A panic because personally, I am scared to death to walk into a classroom given my health issues. And professionally, that fourth quarter last year was absolutely the worst quarter of 16 years of teaching at that point. And to try and get my panic under control, I decided to start writing stuff down. And so I just wrote pages and pages and pages of stuff in a notebook, most of which is just pathetic. And it's like a junior high journal or something. Like, what if they all hate this? What if it's honestly emotionally pathetic, but it was kind of cathartic for me at the time. And then as I started writing these things down, I thought, okay, you've got to get this organized. You've got to create a framework for attacking something that is probably going to happen. And the framework that I came from years of reading too many military histories. And that framework was what in the military they call a CONOPS, a concept of operations. And the CONOPS framework has kind of gone out into industry. I know some of you are teaching in different industry related fields. So maybe you can comment on this a little bit later, but the CONOPS thing definitely shows up in software design and stuff, but it was initially a military application. And the military definition of CONOPS is a statement of commander's assumptions or intent in regard to an operation or series of operations with the intent of providing additional clarity of purpose. And so the CONOPS basically comes down to figuring out what you have, figuring out what the enemy has, figuring out what the threats to you are, figuring out what the available resources are to you, and coming up with something that is achievable and something that is measurably a goal. So I started out with kind of this Tom Clancy thing of a concept of operations and tried to dive into that framework on my laptop with about 56K internet up at the lake. And the goal that I came up with, I thought, okay, if there's only one thing I'm going to do in what will probably be a very unusual school year, the only thing I need to do is ensure student safety and academic success. Everything I do has to serve that goal. And if it doesn't serve that goal, it's gone for this year. So that brought me to a really uncomfortable point. And I really hope I'm not the only person who's been teaching for a while that ended up at this point where all of a sudden the things that I had learned in my teacher education program became really, really important to me for the first time since my first year teaching. Intentional reflection. For the first time, I really, really, really had to think about, what do I do in the classroom? What do I really do? Because I think after a while, it becomes routine. And we fall into patterns and we fall into habits and we just kind of do what we do. And it's hard to even explain to somebody if somebody says, what do you do in your classroom? It's like, I teach, without actually thinking, okay, what does that mean on a daily basis? What is my style of teaching? What has worked about it? What does not work about it? What's critically important? And so as I thought about how my classroom had been a fairly safe and fairly successful place over my career, what were the things that made it safe? And when I talk about safety here, I am not talking about Alice drills. It's about the kids who have felt confident enough to talk to you about serious situations and get them pointed into a direction of someone who can help them. And a successful classroom, not necessarily test scores, but more a classroom where most people do their stuff and get their credits. So when I started thinking about, okay, what does that really look like? I came back to one thing over and over again, and it was relationship. You know, most of any of our success that we're going to have in our classrooms is based on relationship. So that was going to be a huge thing to tackle in this concept of operations. Clear expectations. That typically I've had fairly clear expectations for my students over time. Lessons that were mildly amusing. Every year when I would give out a survey at the end of class, what did you like? What did you not like? What should I change for next year? Typically at least 50% of the stuff came in with, I like when you do funny voices. And so I thought, okay, how do I recreate that in a virtual environment? A quick assessment loop for any of us in the classroom. Having a quick assessment loop, being able to get timely feedback to the kids is really, really important. How do you do that in the virtual environment? And then the other thing that is really, really tricky in the virtual remote environment, being available in little places. And I hope I'm not the only one, and please, teachers who have been doing this for a while, chime in, because it might be something that the pre-service teachers haven't encountered as much yet. But so much of our job happens outside of our classroom. It happens after class, in 30 seconds after class, when a kid comes up and says something that you kind of latch onto and you go, oh, that's how he works. When you are lined up for the water fountain to refill your water bottle, and you just happen to hear a couple kids talking about something, and you're like, oh, that's really interesting. That's what they think about X, Y, or Z. Being in the hallways and making those relationships, high-fiving kids, or walking through the lunchroom. I would love it if somebody would speak to this. So it's not just me talking, because I think it's something really important for the pre-service folks to understand.
No, even though I'm pre-service, I've gone through student teaching about twice now. So I have two different experiences with both of them. And definitely this year, I've been trying to get much more involved, walking through the halls, getting to know my students. And I can definitely say there's a clear connection there, and it helps in so many other ways. Just getting even just some feedback, what you want to do in your own classroom, to just seeing how the kids work.
And I concur, those hallway conversations are critical. It's a great way to get feedback on, did they understand what you were talking about? What's going on in their lives that you can use as examples when you're moving forward into the next topic, and be able to make those connections.
I dropped out there, didn't I?
Just for a little bit, you did.
Oh my gosh, it was, I just want to tell you, this is exactly what happens in class, and it frightens me all the time when I ask something and then I hear nothing in return. And I wonder, am I totally wrong about something and everybody thinks I'm a freak, or was it the technology?
So something that I had in that same line, Joe, is I teach 5th grade and they're all online, and I got kicked out. So of course, Zoom makes the first person in the meeting the moderator. So of course, the one little kid becomes the moderator then, and they have to let me back in. And I have a room full of 10-year-olds on Zoom, so they have to let me back in. So finally they let me back in, and it's like a circus, right? Because what do we do without the teacher? What do we do?
Yeah, the same as if you walked out of the classroom for 15 minutes.
Exactly, yeah. So in the Zoom setting, it's just as bad, especially with 10-year-olds.
Yeah, so here we are.
Funny thing with that, since I co-teach, I'm an intervention specialist. So when we were all online, I was co-teaching. So both myself and the coach and the content teacher were in the Google Meets, and I get a text from the teacher saying, hey, why isn't anybody responding to me? Why isn't it like because you dropped out? I was like, but I'm looking at it, I was like, Jim, you're using two different things so you can read. You're using two different computers so you can read the chat. The one with your video and audio crashed.
And I mean, what have we got here? We've got one of these humanizing moments, right? I mean, this is exactly the stuff that you hope to recreate in the virtual room, and the technology does it for you by screwing up. So.
Or when you have to use a space heater in your classroom and you turn on your projector and it blows the entire breaker of your room and 3 others.
Yes, 100%. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, you guys. So now I got to figure out how to share my screen again. Did we talk? Did you guys hear me talking at all about being available in little places?
Yeah, you briefly touched upon it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and a lot of people gave their views of that.
Okay, great. Well, I will just get right on by and hope that we're okay. So one of the critical parts of a ConOps is assumptions. Being able to come up with a list of, okay, this is probably going to happen, this is probably going to happen, this is probably going to happen. How do I deal with it? So I started out with a list of assumptions in this document back in July. Students are going to have devices and internet access, which, God bless them, TPS did a great job with this. The other assumption was I'm going to have students for live or nearly live broadcasts twice a week. Another assumption, or perhaps wish, was I'll be at home. Another assumption that seemed pretty safe after Q4 last year was the majority of students are going to suffer from motivational issues. It's going to be really hard to motivate. Another assumption was an unacceptable number of students are going to slip away if the teacher isn't in constant contact. That making intentional contact this year is going to be more important than it's ever been. Building meaningful, motivating relationships is going to be exceptionally difficult. Attention spans are going to be really limited. And, oh, look, there it is, what we just had. Technology problems will occur, and students won't report them until the last possible minute. So starting with this set of assumptions, then it was like, okay, how do I exploit the good stuff, and how do I try to ameliorate the bad stuff? So this is a screenshot of my original ConOps, and some of it seems pretty silly in retrospect. Some of it, I never could have imagined still doing it at the end of January. But how do my problems that must be solved came first. So I kind of went through this bullet point list of problems to solve. How do I monitor student physical and emotional well-being? How do I motivate the non-self starters? How do I recreate the dynamic and relationship you typically find in a classroom? How do I build in flexibility for inevitable student, family, illness, and death, or as we had happened a week ago, teacher death? How do I pre-plan for student mobility from economic distress? What other student needs, diet, clothing, safety, emotional, are going to arise from economic collapse? What do I do if community pressure returns to us too early and I can't teach? Well, it doesn't look like we're back too early yet. So then it was like solutions. Just start brainstorming solutions up. So near daily check-ins, insanely tough but necessary. Motivating people, no idea. Recreating the dynamic, reserve synchronous time for class discussion, create small groups through classroom. Building in flexibility, reading guide grades can't move because of discussion days, final learning projects. Pre-planning for student mobility. Have kind of a ready-to-wear catch-up packet ready on bi-weekly intervals. Here's what you missed, do this. Weekly check-ins on their needs. And then if community pressure sends us back too early, play the goddamn lottery and pray was my only plan for that. Out of that, I didn't go into detailed plans on what I was going to do off of that. That was kind of my starter for how am I going to conceptualize the solutions out of those statements. So then I tried to form a principle about each of my 3 preps. And the operating principle that I still have pasted up right here is each stripped down course, because I knew they were going to have to be stripped down for time requirements, will center on content created in advance with a catchy delivery to free up my time to have discussions, build relationships, attend to student family needs, and fight the brush fires that are going to erupt. This will provide buy-in as a foundation for learning. So as I started to develop the specific plans for how I was going to carry out my year, everything had to serve this principle or it had to go. And I've more or less stuck with that through the year. My action items then, by the end of July, I started saying, okay, so if I'm going to make this work, if I'm going to address every one of those things that I think is going to be a concern this year, and I've got possible solutions, what do I actually do to implement that? What are the tactical steps to this? So one of the things I wrote was knock out as much content as you can before 8th September, because maintaining student contact is going to consume all of your time. Twice weekly individual contact has to be maintained. Creating routines is going to be critical and difficult. Self-directed work on the same day every week, big direct instruction pieces, same day every week. Homework routine, always due on the same day. Regular due date needed to be different for the 3 preps, so the feedback cycle could be maintained without having 150 people stuff coming in on the same day. Live contact days had to be reserved for questions and discussions to build the student-student relationships and the teacher-student relationships. Direct instruction on recorded video. And then the fact that I have 2 high schoolers in my house really helped inform the way that video piece went. My kids do any of you watch Good Mythical Morning with Rhett and Link on YouTube?
Familiar with them.
Familiar with them a little bit? So I basically was consuming the same media as my kids because we live in a 900 square foot house. So over the past year, I've really gotten an appreciation or lack of appreciation for what teenagers are watching. And I started looking at the way all of the stuff they watch on YouTube was structured and started thinking about what are they doing? How long are they spending? What are the production values? What does YouTube content look like? Because up until this point, my experience with YouTube content was like learning how to play something on the guitar or how to fix my car, and finding some random guy from Atlanta under the hood of his Volvo and, you know, trying to switch out a mass airflow filter or something, and then swearing a lot. So I had to figure out how the kids use YouTube. And what I came up with off of what I watched with my own children was videos had to be short, snappy, funny, and attention grabbing, or they're gone. Nothing could be over 25 minutes, preferably not more than 15 minutes. And then for my non-honors course, 1 video a week. For my honors AP courses, 2 videos a week. The other thing that I kind of figured right away, people are going to cheat, and there's not a lot you can do about that on a multiple choice test. So creative response items were going to be way more valuable this year than anything else for actual assessment. And then the final thing that I think all of us really need to keep in mind going forward in an uncertain future, there are only so many hours in a day. And Nancy, you said at the top something related to this. Between creating videos, grading and entering material, and contacting students and parents personally, you can only do so much, and stuff is going to have to fall by the wayside at some point. So all of this was done, and I was feeling really proud of myself by the 1st of August, until I realized you suck. You should have been doing this your entire career. Why have you not been calling parents once a week your entire career? Why have you not been emailing kids individually twice a week your entire career? You're a terrible teacher. This is basic stuff. This is what you should have been doing the whole time. So the school year got started, and I did try to stockpile as much stuff as I could over the summer. So I started recording these short, punchy videos over the summer. So I had a bunch stockpiled up so I could devote every hour of the non-live teaching to student and parent contact. And especially in the first month of the year, it was incredibly critical, and it's something I'm going to take with me out of the COVID era, is having as much stuff put in the bank at the beginning of the year as possible, so you can devote all of your time to building relationships early. Because yes, it was probably more important this year and more difficult this year, but I have learned so much more about my kids and their families this year than I ever knew in the past. And it's been incredibly impactful for my practice. Along the way, I learned some stuff that didn't work. So one of my classes, I decided I was going to do like a TV show, and there were going to be story arcs throughout a unit. And I was going to have season 1, season 2, season 3 for each unit. That absolutely did not work for me. Number one, you lose a ton of time in scripting the stuff. Number 2, the students hated it, which was a lot more important. And so it was a time suck, and it didn't work. So that was gone in a couple of weeks. Weekly contact, even being in weekly contact with the kids doesn't always work. There are just limits to what you can do, and limits to how many times you can really be in contact. And that sucks, but it hasn't worked with everybody. Stuff that did work over the course of this year. They want to be entertained, at least in the virtual environment. And I hope to be in a non-entertainment form of education by next year. But when they're online, they want to be entertained, and you have to deliver some kind of entertainment value to them. The other thing that they've said in their semester evaluations, they wanted predictability and reliability in class routines, and they appreciated it from the teachers they got it from. And again, I just can't say it enough. Weekly individual contact is something I should have been doing forever. And it works with the majority really well. And there's a minority that I still don't know how to reach. I just don't know where I'm going. As far as videos, what worked? So one of the things was, I think every subject this is possible, but for history, it's really easy. And that's seeing how it works in the real world. So for my US history class, every episode in kind of this flipped classroom concept where they're watching the videos of a lesson on their off days, and then we discuss it on the 2 live days. Every one of those videos started with something in Northwest Ohio. So it was me on location, somewhere related to whatever it was we were talking about in American history, and then tying the familiar to the unknown for them. The familiar of, okay, if you just drive out Angola Road, you're going to find this brick schoolhouse. You guys on the west side know where I'm talking about. Or standing down by the side of the Maumee River to talk about Hoovervilles during the Great Depression. All of these little video hooks worked really well with the AP classes and got them thinking about the connections between their personal history, their city history, and American history. Government classes didn't lend themselves quite as well to that every day. So for the government classes, one of the things I salvaged from the idea of creating seasons of television was having characters. What did kids always seem to like in class? They liked the voices. That's what they told me. So all those times when in class we would have the British perspective and I'd throw on my terrible Dick Van Dyke English accent and be like, well, you see, the biggest problem was this. Why not make him into a character that shows up every time we talk about British influence in the American government? In the World War II class, anytime we're talking about problems with the alliances, we bring in this guy who I wrote an elaborate backstory for, Sir Fleming St. John Smeeth, the 17th Lord of the Admiralty, which meant he was only 16 heartbeats away from being the first Lord of the Admiralty. Another one of the characters was our presidential historian, Dr. Wednesday Quincy Adams, who talked a lot about death and killing things in the context of doing lessons on the executive branch in the government class. Then in the World War II class and coming into the APUSH class was Santa von Clausewitz, who was a descendant of the Prussian military theorist and St. Nicholas, who was always getting into fights with reindeer as seen behind there. And then finally, the fan favorite was our angry mom, the angry soccer mom, who was the single greatest character of the year so far, because in a government class this year, first of all, I want to be very clear and say, this was the least fun year ever to teach government. And I didn't think anything could be less fun than the year before that. And this was no fun this year. It was absolutely no fun to teach government for a number of reasons. Because there's a lot you can't say when you've got parents listening in the room while the kids are in there. I had a QAnon parent this year trying to chime into class every couple of weeks. It was nightmarish. So there's a lot of stuff Mr. Boyle can't say, but there was a lot of stuff that Angry Mom could say. And so Angry Mom would come in and then I could try to reason with her. And it was really great and the kids dug it. And I think, teacher in drag is always a selling point.
There's a couple comments in the chat.
Yes, please.
I missed a couple earlier. And when you were talking about, I can't remember exactly the question you asked, but in regards to what you're doing right now, Nancy says that seems like a very intense level organization is required, ditto with the predictability. And she also says you are the John Green of Northwest Ohio. And McKenna said, this is amazing. I love your creativity and keeping your students engaged with these characters.
Oh, thank you, you guys. It's John Green has a lot better production values than I do. It was, although that's exactly where I was going to go with this next part. Production values are actually important for all of us, I think, because all of us over the course of this year have been on at least one Google Meet or Zoom where the audio or the lighting was terrible. And at the very beginning of all of this, when I thought about what I wanted to do, the first thing I did was invest in, and I can't flip over right now, but I have 3 lights around me, which a friend who did broadcast design helped me with. And it wasn't that expensive, but I've got a light that's on me, 2 to keep the green screen lit, because even light on the green screen is how you keep the green screen more or less realistic. And then the big thing, I hope I sound okay to you guys, but the big thing was getting a microphone that got some better sound quality, because that was the other thing I remembered from last year was the kids were just always complaining, we can't hear you, you sound terrible. So the production quality was pretty important. The other thing that I really want to say, and boy, do I wish there were district technology people listening, YouTube is our friend. No matter what the district technology people say, YouTube is our friend because the kids know how to use it and they know how to navigate it. And I still ended up, even though I didn't have story arcs, I still did every unit as season 7, episode 6, season 7, episode 7. Every one of the individual units became an episode in a season. And it's become so easy for the kids to say, okay, what did I need to catch up on? It's like, yeah, season 5, episode 2, watch that tonight and you should be okay for tomorrow. They are YouTube natives. They do really well with that as kind of an organizing principle. And finally, I guess the big thing, and this has been with my social studies team at work, the thing that's really been dawning on us over the past couple of weeks is kind of realizing that all of us were able to get up for this year. We were able to find ways to make it work this year and get a little creative. And we all keep talking about going back to normal. And honestly, the more we have talked about it, and again, maybe we're being paranoid, this is going to shape our practice for a decade. That we're going to be dealing with echoes of this that'll probably get progressively softer by the time we're 10 years out. But if you looked this year, like I had some sophomores this year, and it was just patently obvious that they had not really had a freshman year, that they had not made it out of freshman patterns. And if you think about next year's freshmen, who in a district that's been mostly remote for a year, those are kids that never really finished 8th grade and struggled through a freshman year, or never finished 7th grade, had a virtual 8th grade, and they're coming into freshman year still not knowing how to school in a lot of ways. We're going to be dealing with this for a really long time. And I guess maybe a ConOps framework isn't for everybody, but I really strongly encourage you to think about what's coming in the door next year and the year after that and the year after that, because it's going to be different every year. You may be an American history teacher, a sophomore American history teacher, 5 years down the road and wonder why none of them know anything about Ohio. Well, Ohio history ended up on the chopping block during the COVID year, and they don't have that anymore. Or you've got kids who came in from 8th grade and had their whole 8th grade online and don't seem to have a real handle on the first half of American history. That's the way this is going to be for a while. And we're just going to have to really be intentional about thinking. And for math teachers, my gosh, the stuff you guys are going to have to think out of, okay, they had this gap, so this is how I need to fill. Each one of us is going to be prepping for this. How do you make it work? What's your ConOps? What's critical? And how do you survive? So that's kind of the end of what I had put together. Are there questions that I can answer at all, or things you guys want to discuss?
I was going to say the math thing. I totally agree with. I've already been talking with the coach, with people I co-teach with, about how are we going to fill in the gaps from last year, and then how are we going to fill in the gaps for those that are coming up. because like I'm working with geometry and algebra 2.
Oh yeah, and that foundational stuff in algebra 1 is critical for both of those.
Joe, some other things that are in the chat from earlier. Tim says that he has steadily beefed up my personal video equipment for recording videos and live streaming since the spring, which kind of goes along with what you were talking about in regards to lighting and so forth when you're teaching online.
Yeah, and one way to think about this too is that if we're all kind of building up a library of content this year, it should be usable for a while. That I think the time and effort and money that we've put into doing things online this year will pay dividends down the road.
Yeah, you can see the 18-inch ring light in the back.
Yes.
And I have one of the this is my home setup, so I only have my GoPro as the web camera and my Blue Yeti Yeti caster. But at school, I had my screen tablet for drawing. For the equations, I use a Panasonic Lumix mirrorless camera as my web camera with a capture card.
Yes.
My school computer is jury rigged together with spare parts from the esports team.
Perfect.
Joe, were you allowed to go into school to teach, or was TPS forced to stay at home?
So last year we were forced to stay at home, and then this year we were forced into the building at the beginning of the year, where the internet was not supporting all of us being online at the same time. And then we got the option in October. We got the option to be school or home, depending on what worked best for you.
Yeah, I chose to go into school, and in my wing that should have 10 teachers, it was me and a long-term sub who I ended up helping her with all her technology stuff the whole time. But I just felt it was easier to teach science from my room because I had my stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
If a kid was confused about, I teach planetary science. So the sun, the moon, the earth, their lineup, I had a model, I could grab it, and now I can show you. Whereas at home, I'd be, trying to draw it on my wall or something. So I found it easier with that option to go in.
Oh yeah, that makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah, and I could do demos real quick, and I could pull models real quick. It just was easier for that on the spot, because I too tried to teach like Bill Nye, like you were saying, the storylines, and I don't have what Bill Nye has. So
I think this trick is he's got a staff of writers, and
exactly. And I actually had the opportunity to meet Bill Nye when he was in Toledo. And he was real nonchalant and real like, yeah, it's what I did 20 years ago. So, yeah, but I just felt that I could not be Bill Nye. I couldn't do that entertaining constantly. And I was teaching live every day, half-hour blocks. So I had 5 half-hour blocks that I was teaching with 10-year-olds. And so, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's no way to put out the energy necessary for...
Joe, I have a question in regards to if students, could you require students to put their cameras on, or does TPS not allow that? And how did you, if they didn't have their cameras on, how did you know for sure that they were there?
Oh, no, that's a great question. So first of all, the district did not have a requirement that kids had to have cameras on, nor did they say that we couldn't require it ourselves. I definitely, in the first few days, I tried to get everybody, I begged them to turn their cameras on so I could kind of get a feel for who was who. You also at that time got an appreciation for how complex living situations are sometimes. And I did not want to require anybody to put their camera on after that.
The complex living situations was a real eye-opener and awareness.
Yeah.
You have an assumption, but then when you see it, you're like, oh yeah, it's okay if your camera's off. It's okay.
Yes.
Or like the students that are, their workspace is sitting crisscross apple. God, did I just say crisscross applesauce as a high school teacher? Sitting on their bed with their Chromebook in their lap.
Right. Yeah, I felt I couldn't in good conscience ask these kids to do that. So it's optional for me. Yeah, I just felt like that was the best way to go. But the second part is the scary part. How do I know they're tracking? So I have a 3-screen setup here, and I generally every day have a call list of who I'm going to call on for specific things in our discussions of the stuff they did on our asynchronous days. And so I try to use shame a little bit, and I definitely, it's like, hey, Marty, you're not here, are you? And then everybody giggles, and they don't want to be Marty the next time.
So I have student teachers that I work with, and I have one that is completely remote, and that's something that she has really struggled with in regards to, first of all, she's never even met these kids. She's a student teacher, so she doesn't have a clue on what they even look like. And they don't put their screens on, and trying to get them to participate has been really challenging to build that relationship when you're a student teacher. But I do have to say that she's done a really good job of being creative with some of her assignments and doing a lot of group work. So putting them in breakout rooms or whatever it is. And then she constantly is rotating and visiting them, and, getting them to participate in the discussion. So if, they almost have to be there, because she'll put them, it'll obviously show up that they don't go into a room, and the other students get upset that, Sally didn't show up, and we can't get this done. So that has been, it seems like it's a small thing to do, but it actually has been very effective for her.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, popped in my head. Has anybody had students that they remote into their live sessions, but then they're doing something completely different? Yeah, like we had a student in our geometry C class where you heard the sound of the weight machines clanking in the background.
Points for productivity.
One of my son's a high schooler, and somebody remoted into their Zoom class from a ski lift. So, yep. So they're creative, but he was there.
As junior pre-service teachers right now, we have a 3-hour seminar Friday mornings from like 8 to 10:50. And we were put into breakout rooms, and one of the people messaged in mine, they're like, hey, sorry, I'm not going to talk. I'm going through airport security right now. So that was interesting.
Yeah, we had a teacher who she still remoted in from the Cleveland Clinic, where her parents were both in the ICU. So it does go both ways.
Yeah, I think that McKenna, she had wrote earlier in the chat that I didn't expect to grow to like the online format in a way, because I prefer face-to-face when it comes to learning. However, now that I've started to like online a little bit, because of how convenient it is to join from anywhere and jump from one meeting to another in a matter of seconds, which is very true. As a student, right?
It's different I like this a lot, but I had 9 years working in kind of a synchronous distance learning environment already. But it's been interesting for me. I have a senior in high school, a sophomore in high school, and a seventh grader under my roof. And it's really been interesting for me to watch 3 kids with the same biological beginnings, 2 of whom are really good at online, and 1 of whom cannot do this at all, completely wired the other way. And I try to be cognizant of what I see in my house with what I'm doing out here.
Joe, Nancy had written in the chat also a question: how did you do your individual check-ins?
So the individual check-ins, I started doing a parent letter every week that I sent on Fridays with a preview of the next week. And then my parent list I have broken into, and I'm lucky, really lucky that, well, I guess lucky for the short term, that my numbers are down a little bit this year, so there's only 120. But I broke my parent call list. Frankly, most of the time the parents don't answer, and a number of the parents have been like, hey, it's okay if you text, or it's okay if you email. So my actual phone call list is down to about 70 now. So just break it into, on the days I only have, so I guess the other thing I should note, I have a lot more time than a lot of people do, because in these distance learning classes we have in TPS, my class max isn't limited to 26 or 28, it's 52. So I actually, when we're in normal school, I only work first, second, third period, and typically I see 150 kids by 11 o'clock in the morning. So because of that and the way the period bell schedule has worked, I only have live kids on Monday and Thursday. So then those other days, I've got 8-hour work days to be on the phone all day, making phone calls to the parents. The kids, I basically stay in touch with through the TPS email. And then if I sense something is going wrong, I make a phone call. But I more or less do that through, and by phone call, a Google Meet, a Google Voice call. But yeah, that's what I've done, and that's how I've had the time to do it.
One thing I've noticed is it's remarkably how much more parent contact you get when you send them a text, either through Google Voice or I got a Ring Central from the district. And so it's remarkably how much more communications you get from a text rather than a phone call. You're like, and how many times parents have full voicemail voicemail message boxes.
Yep. I completely agree. Texting does seem to be the silver bullet with a lot of parent communication. McKenna, did I have trouble with getting parents on board with weekly communication? I have had a few who have been, please unsubscribe me from your email list, and I respect their wishes.
We have about 3 more minutes. If anybody else has some questions for Joe.
Nancy asked about the wigs, and the wigs were from Amazon. And I have bought the very finest wigs that $12 can buy.
So if you write those off on your taxes, Joe, you have to definitely give quite a description of why you're writing off wigs for your.
Yeah, among other things that are out here, like,
Yes.
I'm trying to see if I can reach any of the props over here from the table. That would include the, the Admiral's hat, the Nixon mask. Yeah, there's a lot of strange write-offs this year.
It's kind of good that we're virtual because I don't think I want to see you in heels, buddy.
No, and that's the great thing about the table. I don't have to be in heels. I can be wearing the, I've got the adorable little Wednesday Quincy Adams dress, but I can still be wearing jeans to keep everything appropriate.
So
I don't have your skill of dressing up, but I did show up as Miss Frizzle one day. So that was enough to take them on a tour of.
Love it. They love that stuff.
Well, all I've done, I got a pun a day calendar. And the threats are if they don't do their homework, I go for the puns.
That should be enough to do it.
I have one student who's big into anime and manga and stuff. I got a couple actually. And I threatened to spoiler alert them if they didn't retake their quizzes that they missed. There's one kid, he's missing like 5 quizzes because he just wasn't doing them. And I told him, if you don't come to the enrichment time to retake those quizzes, I will spoil a chapter a day.
Out of curiosity, the rest of you who have been at least partially virtual, do you have the kids who hang around a little bit afterwards?
Feeling okay?
Yeah.
A little bit. That's been my favorite thing this year. There's at least in two of my classes, there's kind of a nucleus of kids that want to talk about the latest episode of Mandalorian, WandaVision, and that almost feels normal. That feels like real school when after class somebody's like, hey, your Browns looked really good this weekend. It's like, yeah, let's talk about that. Like, that's been really fun.
Yeah, a lot of times that like when we were full virtual, we would always open the things about 10 minutes early. And like one of the teachers I teach with, she has like 50 kids at the school, just like especially in like the junior senior class. They just call her a school mom. And so they'll just pop in early, talk, and just technically shoot the shit.
Right.
Language. And that like we just went back to a hybrid, and that was one of the things we were talking about that we kind of missed was just the human interactions.
Yeah, and the thing is, there's important stuff that happens there too, and that's where we get the moments of kind of being in the hallway or the lunchroom back at school, and I think that time is pretty important too.
Or when we had the 1 week where we could work fully remotely, and one of my co-teachers kept getting photobombed by her dog and her kindergartner.
Yeah, we've gotten to know everybody's dogs at BGSU. They
Yes.
show up a lot, and or all of us that have puppies, quarantine puppies like I do. There's several of us that do, so it's kind of interesting to keep an eye on that. And students also that got dogs during this. We are at 11:46 actually, and we're supposed to head back to the main room. So we're going to just wrap it up here. If anybody else has any questions, and Joe, I don't know if you're